Today we have with us Massimiliano Bruno, a finance professional based in Italy. He is here to speak on starting a career in private equity and how you can best position yourself for a career in the private equity industry. Thanks for joining us, Massimiliano.
Hi, Phil. Thank you very much for having me here. It's such a great pleasure speaking to you today.
Great. Okay, well, the first question I have is, what is your professional experience prior to entering the private equity industry?
Okay, I will quickly introduce myself and tell you about how my background helped me to approach and work in the private equity industry during my master's in business administration.
Perfect.
So before the MBA, I was an associate consultant for the Italian office of Bain & Company, and I used to work with luxury, consumer goods, oil and gas, and TMT practices. In Bain, I was mainly involved in projects related to business development, organization, entry new market, and post-merge integration.
Okay, great. And what kind of education or training have you gone through to prepare you for your finance and private equity career?
Well, in order to go into private equity firms, of course, like being an associate consultant at management consulting firms is not enough because, of course, you have a lot of experience about strategy at high level, but of course you need to have some investment banking training. What I did basically is to attend one of the top business schools in Europe, which is AI, and is very strong about finance. And at that school, I try to improve about my valuation techniques, M&A modeling, leverage buyout. Basically, I try to complete my background since being only a management consultant is definitely not enough if you really want to move to private equity afterwards.
Sure, I think I hear that a lot in the U.S. as well. Just having a background in management or general business just isn't enough. You really need to work hard to fill out your resume and make sure that you're the most attractive candidate. Is it pretty competitive in Europe for private equity positions?
Well, I guess it's same as U.S. Private equity
Sure.
is one of the most competitive industry, especially finance related. And right now, usually the top candidates are manager from top consulting firms like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, as well as people coming from investment banking division like leverage finance or M&A from Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Rothschild. Depends pretty much on the kind of funds that you would like to work with. Usually an industrial partners would like to have some candidates with a balanced team between investment bankers as well as management consulting, especially funds which like to only act as a finance partners. So basically they work a lot with financial engineers. In that case, they usually prefer only people coming from investment banking division. And of course, having an MBA for a top business school in Europe or worldwide is highly preferred because you also start as a senior associate instead of an associate level, and basically it will help you to understand better the market. Because usually it's not enough to be only a management consultant or only an investment banker. You need to have a big picture of the whole process that private equity firms does during the life from 5 to 10 years of the funds.
Sure.
And basically a very complete profile is highly recommended, especially for mega funds or funds which has a very, very high structure process in order to get in.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that answer. That was a really good look at what it takes to start your career. Speaking of your MBA, what aspects of your MBA did you find especially useful as you actually started working in private equity and in finance?
Okay, good. I think that an MBA is a great way to put your feet inside the private equity world because basically at least 50 to 70% of private equity professionals, they have an MBA, and you're always talking about top 10 schools worldwide. And it's great for your network as well as the things you can improve doing the MBA and the experience you have. for me it was an overwhelming experience, and I tried to focus on private equity from day one because as I was working in management consulting at Bain, I realized how important it is to understand very well the process of the private equity from starting of the investment to the exiting. While usually as a management consultant, I was only focused on a very small part of the process. Usually management consulting, they advise a lot of private equity about due diligence, about exit strategy, about other strategic recommendation. But when you're in the buy side, it's completely different because in that case, you have to perform the decision yourself. And therefore, an MBA will help you to understand very well all the process, to network a lot with other private equity professionals. I used to work a lot on the network. I spoke to professors, to other private equity profession, to people coming from the industry. I was attending all the conference. I participated with the private equity and venture capital clubs. And at the end, I managed to work there because it was a lot about networking. So basically, it's just not enough to be a very good management consultant or an investment banker. You also have to have a great network in the industry because I guess this is the most important things you have to do. And an MBA, of course, is one of great options if you want to leverage your network.
Great. Yeah, that's something we're always talking about is the actually developing that network, and especially reaching out to, whether it's professors, like you said, or whether it's private equity professionals that you meet, and going to events and really developing that network and gearing it towards a career in private equity rather than just any business or finance career that you can find. If you really hone it in on a career in private equity, it can be a lot more useful and a lot more valuable, I think.
That's exactly how I think about it. If you want to work, for example, let's say in investment banking, you have very, very structured process. You apply online to Goldman Sachs, to JP Morgan, and you know already what does it take to get in. In private equity, it's completely different because usually there's no actually a recruiting process. You have to go there and meet professionals from your university, from your workplace, attending conference. During my 3 week of the MBA, I flew back from Madrid to Italy and attend a very great conference organized by the IFI, which is the Italian Private Equity Association, where I managed to meet with 6 or 7 partners from very good private equity firms. And that was a very important opportunities to develop my network. And this is something that in other industry is not worth it to do that. But for private equity, I guess even knowing the people from day one is critical because later on, as you start building your network, everybody you meet can be useful. And that I think is probably the most important thing if someone wants to go inside the market or manage to grow with a career in private equity.
Great. Yeah, that really helps when you flesh out the difference between applying to investment banks versus private equity in the process. If you wanted to speak a little more on that, what was the interview process like at the private equity firms that you interviewed with? I know you mentioned it's sort of about who you know and getting into that first step, but once you do the interview process, what was that like for you?
Yes, that's a very good question. The answer is not so easy because pretty much depends on the kind of funds you would like to approach, and one process can be very different from one another. Especially if we are considering very big private equity firms like mega funds, usually the interview is much more structured. You usually can have 5, 6, or 7 interviews. They can last several months. They generally recruit from only usually investment banking firms, from M&A or leveraged finance division. They look someone in a specific sector, for example, renewable energy, consumer goods, or others. And they usually don't start as an analyst position, but only as an associate level if you have 2 or 3 years investment banking, or maybe a senior associate if on top of that you also have an MBA. Well, of course, if you are managed very well, in 2-3 years you can move to vice president. So
Sure.
basically, it is very, very a fast track. But also the interview process is extremely hard. And usually, as a final round, they can give you an opportunity to pitch for the partners of the private equity firms. They will give you some documentation about a company to buy, and you have to build the PowerPoint presentation, the financial
Oh, wow.
valuation, the LBO model, and in maybe 3 to 5 hours, you have to be ready with the presentation, and all the partners will be ready to challenge you on every single assumption that you make about growth, about how you perform the discounted cash flow. So basically, it's very, very tough, and that is why I was telling you that being only a management consultant or an investment banking is extremely difficult to get into. You have to be very good in both things. But as I was telling, it depends also on the kind of firms you're recruiting, because basically if you go to a small private equity firms, 5 to 6 people targeting mid-caps or medium cap, they usually are 5 or 6 people. They need to like you. You have to meet them in maybe 2 or 3 rounds, but the interview is much more focused on your background instead of technicalities, and basically depends also on the experience you would like to have. Usually in mega funds, you have your own track, but it's going to be very, very focused. For example, also in KKR, they have internal consulting firms from people which was working from Bain or McKinsey. While of course, if you go to a small funds, you probably are able to manage all the processes from fundraising to exit option, but of course in a smaller scale. So pretty
Sure.
much depend on you, on how you want to develop your career.
Okay. Great. Yeah, that was a detailed look at the interview process. I appreciate that. Next, I want to know, what does a normal day for a private equity professional look like? You gave us a little bit of insight there, especially when it compares to 2 different sizes of firms, but what do you think a typical day would look like?
Well, as I told you before, it pretty much depends on the stage of your firms. For example,
Sure.
the regular can be very, very different if your private equity firms is in the fundraising process or if in the exit option. Usually during the fundraising process, you try to develop a list of potential investors. So you do a lot of research. You start with the first contact, and you have to meet potential investor in order to convince them to invest in your funds. Then it comes the investment processes, where there's also a lot of due diligence. You start with general information, then you pick 2 or 3 companies. You go and do the very, very analysis and due diligence. And basically afterwards you start with a negotiation and you try to close the deal. Afterwards, after you manage from 3 to 4 years, you start analyzing the investment option, which can be an IPO, a trade sale, or a secondary buyout to another firms. And this is what I personally like about private equity, that every day can be different from one another, and you have to think a lot about every decision you make, because just a small decision can mean everything for you and your team as well.
Sure. Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, it looks like there is no real typical day, but that seems like that's a benefit for you at least, and that sounds pretty exciting. In what ways is the private equity industry in Europe unique?
Well, as you know, European private equity has been one of the industry heavily impacted by the subprime crisis first, and then by the sovereign rate crisis afterwards.
Sure.
But nevertheless, we're seeing a first sign of recovery in the industry. And as I was reading even today in the news, some large PE funds are doing good fundraising. For example, was just today a news that Invest Industrial sold Ducati with a very high multiple, and also managed to reach the fundraising for the next funds. So basically there's something moving, and I know that there are different trends in respect to the past years. For example, once like there was the LBO trends where all the deals was highly leveraged, 80 to 95%. Right now, the trend is changing a lot, especially like in my area, like Italy, Spain. You're seeing a lot of development capital. So basically, private equity funds, they don't try to get the control of the firms, but they would like to invest along with the entrepreneur with probably participation, which is like from 10 to 49%. And they like to provide the equity to firms which would like to step to the next level, but they cannot do it alone because of the credit crisis. They don't have the financing necessary. In this sense, private equity now in Europe is more like a hands-on approach. So you don't want to sell at a higher multiple, just doing financial leverage, but basically you have to go inside the firms, act as a consultant, improve the operation, try to get more visibility to the exit option, and then you just don't be only a financial partner, but as an industrial partner, you go with the entrepreneur close together, trying to develop a strategy for developing in the future, and also try to have a successful exit, because like at the end, this is what private equity is. You have to invest, and the investment has to be successful, and you have to also to look at the IRR. But I guess it's even more fun if you are really managing the firms instead of like putting the money and then trying to get a great return on the participation.
Sure.
But also I can see some other trends in Europe. For example, luxury is one of the sector which usually like 5 or 10 years ago was a little bit disregarded by private equity firms. Right now we're seeing a lot of deals involving this kind of industry. I guess luxury right now is very important for Europe, because like most of the brands in Italy and in France are very, very well worted in Asia, for example. Once it was very difficult for a private equity to estimate the value of a brand, because intangible are very difficult to evaluate. But right now, like India, China expanding, there are a lot of consumers who would like to buy Italian brand, French brand. So basically, there are some very great private equity investment where like you buy an Italian or a French company, you go to India, you go to China, you try to do a scalability, and then like the value of your brand is gonna increase a lot. And in this sense, like Carlyle did a great investment with Moncler, and they recently sold most of the participation to another French private equity at a very high multiple. So I guess even though like in Europe the crises are gonna stay for at least like maybe 2 or 3 years, there are some sector in industry and trends about private equity which can be very, very interesting for the future.
Sure, it sounds like there's some optimism in there, at least when it comes to luxury and brand. So I want to move on to what are some important characteristics of a talented private equity professional? You've listed a few already, but I was wondering if there are any unique skills or knowledge that you think is essential. I know that you speak multiple languages. Do you think that's a valuable skill in applying to top financial firms?
Well, I would like to start like telling you a story when I did an interview with one of the big private equity firms here. One of the investment director like told me that like this is an industry where you have to think with the mind of other people, which is an investor, which is the entrepreneur, because basically it does not depend only on you, but like you have to have a great team and also like great partners. It can be limited partners as well as entrepreneur of the firms we're investing with. So you have to think a lot about how you can persuade other people to that like the direction you are focusing on is the right direction, and this is probably one of the most difficult things in the industry. But I guess there are a lot of other qualities that someone working in private equity needs to have. Of course, like speaking multiple language is more than a plus, because I doing my last private equity interviews, like all the funds was requiring 2 or 3 or 4 languages.
Wow.
I did an interview in London, like probably 2 months ago, where like they were requiring someone speaking Italian, Spanish, and English. And basically, there were also a lot of people with the right CV, people coming from McKinsey, coming from Goldman Sachs, and
Sure.
the level of competition is extremely high in Europe as well. And also, there is going to be a lot of other qualities. Some of that, like you have to be extremely motivated because this is right now not a quick win industry. You really will have to like the industry and have a view on how you would like to have your career. Once it was much more easier to get inside, especially if you were coming from an investment banking big bank. Right now, it is not enough, and you really have to be focused and motivated, and I guess this is probably one of the most important qualities.
Sure. Wow. That's pretty impressive that you are required to have multiple languages. I knew it was a plus, but it didn't seem to be a requirement. I think that's more of a Europe requirement rather than the U.S. But it definitely is seen as a big bonus here as well.
I think so. Well, like in Europe, for example, you have investment firms based in London, but the investment might be one in Italy and one in Spain.
Sure.
London is like 1 hour, 2 hours from top cities in Europe, just flying there. So basically everything is very close, but you have to speak multiple language because like sometimes you can have a call with Italy and then in 2 hours you have to fly to Madrid. So typically speaking multiple language in Europe is not a plus, but right now it's going to be a kind of a requirement. But I think in the US the situation might be a little bit different.
Okay. Well, I guess this would be our final question is if you had any tips for rapidly growing a career in private equity, like what can someone do right now if they're trying to advance their career or get into that position? For example, I know you were active during your academic career in doing a private equity case competition and an industry-related club. Do you have any other tips that would sort of launch someone's career in private equity and better position them for that career?
Of course, like there's a lot of things that you can do if you want to move to private equity. First of all, be proactive. As I said before, even though you plan to move to private equity firms in 2 years, you have to start building your network right now with people from your university, people from your company, and ask them how they moved there and why they did that. And that will make you understand how the different private equity firms work, what's their different target, what's their different nature, and you will start realizing that one private equity firm can be much more different than the other, and the job is not going to be the same in one of the other. And basically, this is probably the most important things. Another one is to be an international candidate. For example, usually if you want to do your MBA, do it abroad in another country because most of the private equity firms will require that. I'm sure this is going to be different in US because probably some of the top business schools are located in US. So basically you can stay in your country, but in Europe this is something completely different. Another important thing is to always be updated with the news because usually the top opportunities arise when private equity firms is starting the fundraising. And the best things you can do here is see, for example, an announcement of one of the big private equity firms which is trying to raise a new funds, and then try to get introduced to some people working inside the firms by a common contact, an alumni of your university, or another people you know from your workplace. And from this connection can arise some important professional opportunities. And this is probably one of the other important things that you have to do if you really would like to move in the industry.
Wow, those are some great tips. Well, that does it for all the questions I have. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Yes,
maybe one last thing, one
Sure.
suggestion to the people people who are trying to move is be patient. This is one of the most competitive industry in finance, and in order to get in, you need to have an extraordinary motivation and to do a lot of effort. But if you manage to do it in the right way, the rewards are going to be high. And so I wish good luck to everyone who would like to work and who's already in the industry.
All right, great. Well, that was a really great interview, and I want to thank you for joining us, Massimiliano Bruno, finance professional and private equity professional based in Italy. And I just want to thank you again for speaking on your career in private equity and how you've advanced your career.
Oh, you're very welcome,
finance.
and thank you very much to you, and good luck.
All right, great. Thank you very much.